Okay, so you sent us a bunch of stuff about AI and creativity, like this Uncharted Depths podcast episode.
Hmm.
It asks this question: is AI doomed to destroy creativity?
Mm.
And honestly, it seems like you're really interested in how AI could affect your work, as a graphic designer.
Yeah, well, it's a question a lot of people are asking, and it's interesting that the episode starts by talking about how AI is already showing up in, the art market.
Yeah, it's not just like a theoretical thing anymore. People are spending a lot of money on AI-generated art. But that brings up the question, is it really art or is it just a really, really good imitation? One of the articles you sent, the algorithmic brush, threat or tool, it really digs into that question.
Yeah, that article makes a really important point. It says that these AI art generators, like Midjourney and DALL-E,
Which the podcast mentioned.
right, they rely on these huge data sets of existing images,
Yeah.
and they use these complex algorithms, often based on neural networks, to analyze and then reproduce the patterns that they find.
So it's not like these programs are coming up with something totally new. They're basically learning from what humans have already created, right?
Exactly. And that's where all this debate about originality comes in. The article says that AI can be seen as just like an extension of existing artistic techniques, sort of like how photography was seen, at first as just like an imitation of painting. It's using a new tool to create. But the idea of getting inspiration from the world around us, that's still the same.
That makes a lot of sense. And
Hmm.
speaking of tools, the podcast also talks about how AI can assist writers using tools like ChatGPT. And there was another article you sent me, The Muse in the Machine. It explores how AI can help writers get past writer's block by suggesting plot points or like dialogue options.
Yeah, and what I find interesting is that the article talks about the different approaches these AI writing assistants use. Some of them, like ChatGPT, they're based on large language models that can predict the next word in a sentence, but others analyze existing stories to give more specific suggestions.
So some are better at style and others are more about structure and plot. That's a really helpful way to think about it. I'm always looking for new tools that can help me explore different ideas quickly as a designer. I wonder if AI could help me generate different layout options based on what a client wants.
It's a perfect example of how AI can be a partner in the creative process, enhancing human capabilities rather than replacing them. In fact, the article, The Muse in the Machine, it argues that AI could help us be even more creative by introducing us to new ideas and perspectives that we might not have thought of on our own.
That's interesting. But doesn't that also raise some concerns about everyone's work becoming too similar? Like if we all use the same AI tools, won't our designs or our writing start to look and sound the same?
That's a valid concern, and the article acknowledges that. But it also says that the human element is still super important. It's up to the artist or the writer to curate and edit and add their own unique style to what the AI produces. Think about it this way. You could use AI to create a bunch of logo ideas for a client, but you'd still need your design skills to pick the best one, refine it, and make sure it fits the client's brand.
I see what you mean. So it's like AI is another tool in our toolbox, but it doesn't replace our skills and our judgment as creatives.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between what humans are good at and what machines are good at. Using AI's strengths, but keeping the core of human creativity intact.
Okay, so we've talked about AI as a creative partner. But the podcast also brings up some concerns about AI as a threat to creativity.
Mm.
And I gotta say, some of those concerns really resonate with me. I've seen AI-generated art that's technically impressive, but it just feels kind of soulless.
That's a really common criticism, and it gets to this deeper question. Can AI really understand and express emotions the way humans do? The Uncharted Depths episode uses AI-generated music as an example. It can be technically good, but it often lacks that emotional depth that you get from music made by people who have, actually lived and felt those emotions.
It's like the difference between reading a love poem written by someone who's been in love versus a poem generated by an algorithm that's just analyzed a bunch of love poems.
Yeah.
There's something authentic about human experience.
Right. The guests on the podcast argue that this lack of genuine emotional connection could be AI's weakness. It might be able to copy the form of human creativity, but it struggles to capture that essence. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally get it.
Mhm.
But what if technology gets to the point where AI can perfectly mimic human emotions? Wouldn't that change things? One of the articles, The Empathy Engine, it suggests that some researchers are already working on AI with emotional intelligence.
That article is really interesting. It talks about the ethical implications of creating AI that can understand and maybe even manipulate human emotions. It suggests that if AI could evoke genuine empathy in us, our whole relationship with art would be totally transformed.
Wow, that's a whole other level of complexity.
Yeah.
We're basically talking about science fiction here. And speaking of complex, there's also the whole issue of copyright and ownership. If an AI creates a design, who owns it? The programmer, the
Hmm.
person using it. Does the AI own it?
It's a huge gray area legally and ethically, and the podcast points out that it's already causing problems. Artists are suing companies because AI models are being trained on their copyrighted work without their permission. They're creating things that are basically too similar.
Wow, so this is already happening. It sounds like it could get really messy.
It definitely could, and it raises these fundamental questions about what art and creativity even mean in a world where machines can create things that look and sound just like what humans make.
This is a lot to take in, but I think we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about AI as a creative partner and as a potential threat. And we've touched on the ethical and legal questions it raises. What do you think is the biggest takeaway for someone like me who works in a creative field?
I think the main thing to remember is that AI doesn't necessarily mean the end of human creativity. It's more about adapting and evolving. As a designer, you'll need to learn how to use AI as a tool, but also be aware of its limitations and potential problems. It's about finding that balance where you can use AI to make your creative process better without losing your own unique vision.
I like that. It's not about replacing human creativity, but about figuring out how to work with AI and use its potential.
Exactly. And that brings up another really interesting point from your research.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the articles you sent, The Future of the Creative Class, it looks at how AI could change things for people working in creative jobs.
Right. That one really got me thinking. It talked about two very different possibilities. One where AI helps us do more, and one where AI basically takes our jobs.
Exactly. And it says that what happens will depend a lot on how we adapt and use AI in our work. It points out that creatives who can use AI tools effectively will probably do really well, while those who resist might struggle.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like any new technology, the people who figure out how to use it, they usually end up being the winners. But it's still kind of scary. As a designer, my originality and my style, that's what I'm known for. What happens if AI can just copy that?
That's a question that the podcast talks about, too. One of the guests suggests that maybe the focus will shift from being original to being a good curator. Humans might become more like creative directors, using AI to generate a bunch of options and then using their expertise to choose the best ones, polish them up, and add their own personal style.
So instead of starting from scratch, we'd be starting with a bunch of AI-generated ideas.
Yeah.
It's an interesting way to think about it. It's like having a whole team of assistants, each with their own artistic style.
Exactly. And the article even says that this could lead to a boom in niche creativity. With AI taking care of the more technical stuff, humans could focus on exploring very specific areas and expressing their unique perspectives in ways that AI might not be able to.
That's actually pretty optimistic. It suggests that AI could lead to more diversity and individuality in art and design, not less. But what about the emotional side of things? If AI is doing the heavy lifting, does that make the connection between the artist and their work less meaningful?
That's a really good question, and it's something the podcast guests debated too. One idea is that even if AI can technically create art, it might lack the emotional depth of art made by a human who put their heart and soul into it.
Like, I can imagine AI creating a design that looks amazing, but would it make you feel the same way as a design that was made by a person with all the little imperfections and personal touches?
Right. The podcast guests talked about how the value of human creativity might be in those imperfections and the evidence of the artist's process and struggles. It's about the story behind the creation and the emotions that are embedded in the work.
So it's not just about what you create, but how you create it and the human element. This reminds me of something you said earlier about the Empathy Engine article. What if AI could actually feel emotions? Would that change how we see AI-generated art?
That's an interesting question. The article suggests that if AI could really experience emotions, it might be able to make art that's not only technically impressive, but also emotionally powerful. Imagine an AI that understands human emotions and creates a design that makes you feel a certain way. That would be pretty incredible.
Kind of scary too, right? If AI can control our emotions through art, that opens up a whole bunch of ethical questions. Think about advertising or propaganda, even political campaigns, like mind control through art.
You're right. The article talks about those ethical concerns. It says that if we're going to develop AI that has emotional intelligence, we need to be very careful about how we use it. There's a fine line between making creativity better and taking advantage of people's feelings.
This is getting pretty intense, but it's important to think about these things. We've talked about the economic impact, the emotional impact, the ethical dilemmas. It seems like AI is going to affect every part of our lives, including how we create things.
Definitely. And as we move forward, it's important to remember that the future of AI and creativity isn't set in stone. It's something we're all creating together through the choices we make, the tools we develop, and the conversations we have.
You said we're creating the future together. That makes me wonder, what does this mean for someone like me? Someone who makes a living from being creative. Should I be worried, excited, both?
It's normal to feel all those things, but I think the key is to change your perspective. Instead of seeing AI as a threat, try to see it as an opportunity. Use the tools that can help you work faster, explore new ideas, and push your creative boundaries.
So focus on working with AI and adapting instead of competing with it.
Exactly. It's about figuring out how to integrate AI into your skills and your process using it to make your creativity stronger, not to replace it. The article, The Future of the Creative Class, it gives examples of artists and designers who are already doing this really well.
That's good to hear. And maybe even a little exciting. I can see how AI could help me when I'm stuck creatively, or help me generate different versions of a design quickly, or even personalize designs for different clients. It could change everything.
That's the attitude. It's about seeing AI as a partner, a collaborator, maybe even a muse.
I like that a lot. But like you said before, it's also important to be aware of AI's limitations and the problems it could cause. What should I watch out for as I start using these tools?
That's a really important question, and it leads us to another crucial discussion. Well, one thing to be careful of is becoming too reliant on AI. I mean, it's easy to get excited about how new and efficient these tools are, but we have to remember they're just that, tools.
So like any tool, they can be misused, or
Mhm.
we can become too dependent on them if we're not careful.
Right, the Future of the Creative Class article talks about that. It warns against becoming too dependent on AI. It says it's really important to keep developing our own creative skills and judgment. We don't want to just become passive, just accepting whatever the AI spits out.
Yeah, we want to stay in control using AI to help us, not to tell us what to do.
Another thing to watch out for is bias. AI models are trained on huge amounts of data, and that data can reflect biases that already exist in society. So sometimes what the AI creates can perpetuate those biases, whether it means to or not.
Oh, that's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that. So for instance, if an AI is trained mostly on images of Western art, it might not be very good at creating images that reflect other cultures.
Exactly. Or it might accidentally reinforce gender stereotypes or other harmful biases that are in the data it was trained on.
Yeah.
We really have to be aware of these limitations and look at what AI creates with a critical eye, making sure it aligns with our own
So
values.
being a responsible AI user means knowing about these biases and making conscious choices about how we use the technology.
Definitely. It's about understanding that AI isn't neutral. It's a product of human choices and decisions, and it can show us both the good and bad sides of humanity. That makes sense. Like any powerful tool, it can be used for good or for bad. It depends on the person using it.
Exactly. And speaking of intentions, I think we should go back to something you mentioned earlier, the emotional aspect of creativity.
Hmm.
Even if AI gets to the point where it can mimic human emotion, will we still care about human creativity as much?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? One of the articles you sent, The Soul of the Machine, it talked about that.
Yeah,
It argued that even if AI can technically copy the form and function of human art, it might not have that intangible soul that makes human art so captivating.
that was a really interesting article. It went deep into this philosophical question of what gives art meaning and value. Is it the skill, the originality, or is it something deeper, something that connects to our shared human experience? I think it's that connection to human experience that really gets me. When I look at art created by a person, I know that someone poured their heart and soul into it. I can feel their struggles, their joys, their unique perspective. That's what makes it so special.
Exactly. And that article suggested that even if AI can copy what human art looks and sounds like, it might never fully capture that depth of human experience, that soul that gives art its meaning.
But what if people start to prefer AI art?
Hmm.
What if it gets so good and so easy to use that human art is seen as kind of outdated?
It's possible, and we need to be ready for that. But I also think it's possible that AI could actually make us appreciate human creativity even more. By showing us what machines can do, it might make us value the things that machines can't do even more.
That's interesting. So by seeing what AI can't do, we might rediscover the beauty and power of human imperfection,
Human emotion.
human connection.
Right. It could be that AI ultimately helps us understand ourselves better, what it means to be human, and what makes human creativity so unique.
That's a nice thought. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listener to remember?
I think the most important thing is that AI and creativity aren't enemies. It's not about machines taking over. It's about finding ways to work together to use AI's strengths while also protecting what's special about human creativity.
It's about being open to the possibilities, but also being aware of the challenges.
Yeah, exactly. And this is just the beginning. As AI keeps evolving, we need to keep asking questions, exploring what's possible, and shaping the future of creativity in a way that's good for both people and technology.
That's a great point, and I think it's the perfect way to end this conversation. Thanks for joining me today and for sharing your insights.
It was great to be here.
And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has given you something to think about. The future of creativity is in our hands. Let's make it something amazing.